My name is Samuel Cross. I'm a final year medical student at Imperial College London, and I'm here today to present a paper, Cabotegravir, Global Access to Long-Acting Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis, or PrEP, for HIV. So as it stands, currently there are 38.4 million people living with HIV across the globe. At the moment, there are roughly 1.5 million new infections every year. And just to put this in context, the HIV pandemic has been rising steadily ever since the first cases were discovered back in the 1980s. And back at the turn of the millennia, we set targets, the UNAIDS targets. The target for incidence that when we set these was to get to 500,000 annual infections or fewer by 2020. At the time that we set these targets, the annual infections were at around 2 million per year. And so we failed by quite a considerable margin to reach this goal. So we were only able to reduce new infections by 25% over the last decade, or last 2 decades rather, compared to the 75% reduction that we actually aimed for. So at the moment, where is the epidemic growing? Is it growing? So over the last 10 years, we've seen a global decrease in incidence worldwide, like I mentioned, of 25%. And the areas that have actually shown this decrease in incidence are Western and Central Europe, North America, West and Central Africa, East and Southern Africa. We've seen in these parts of Africa, we've seen huge decreases, almost 40% over the last decade in incidence. In South Asia and the Pacific as well, we've seen a decrease in incidence there. There are still regions over the globe, however, where incidence is increasing. So South America, Southern America, the Middle East and North Africa, we still see cases increasing. And Eastern Europe and Central Asia, incidence is increasing as well. And so it's really these areas now that we need to focus on when it comes to trying to slow the epidemic rather, and really get control over this incidence. How are we achieving this incidence then in the places where incidence is falling? Obviously, there are lots of biomedical interventions that we're all probably really familiar with. So the use of condoms, HIV testing, needle exchange programs, and pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, which is what this talk is focused on. But there are also other ways that we're managing to control or reduce incidence, and these other interventions that we put in place in combination with the biomedical. This is a term that we usually call combination prevention. So looking at structural interventions, such as laws to protect rights and decriminalization of marginalized groups, and interventions to reduce stigma. And then there are behavioral interventions as well. So counseling on risk reduction, sex education, and campaigns to promote safe sex. So, like I said, this talk is going to focus on PrEP, so the pre-exposure prophylaxis. So at the moment, the mainstay of PrEP is oral PrEP. So it's a tablet you take once a day. And this is obviously to try and minimize the risk of infection with HIV. At the moment, the drug of choice for oral PrEP is a mixture of tenofovir and emtricitabine, that's TDF, FTC, as is commonly written. And lots of you may be familiar, but if you're not, then there is a lot of proof. There's a lot of evidence for efficacy of oral PrEP when compared to a placebo. So 2 big trials that we looked at, or that are important, are the IPREX trial from 2010 and then the IPIG-A trial from 2015. So these trials together cover about 1,500 patients in each group. So 1,500 in a placebo group and 1,500 in the oral PrEP group. In the placebo group over these trials, there was 78 people who were infected with HIV, and in the oral PrEP group, there were about 38. So that's a relative reduction of about 50%. And if you calculate the risk reduction in these groups, then it gives us a combined risk reduction of about 2.7%. So this risk reduction is really doesn't mean an awful lot on its own in terms of the number. What we use it for is to then calculate the number needed to treat to cause benefit, i.e. to prevent one infection in this case. And that's a number that's commonly used for lots of drugs. So the number needed to treat to cause benefit or to prevent one infection for oral PrEP is 38, just using the numbers from these trials. That's a rough number. That is, to cause benefit or to prevent one infection with oral PrEP, we would need to treat 38 people. Important to note, because in this in our study we compared oral PrEP in the form of TDF, which is the older form of oral PrEP available, as compared to the newer form TAF. The reason we did this was because at the moment the generic versions available of TDF, the older form of oral PrEP, and that means it's a lot cheaper than the newer version. And there have been lots of meta-analyses, including meta-analyses done back in 2020 that was in AIDS, that looked at 15,000 patients across 14 trials, which found no difference in efficacy or safety across both these types of oral PrEP. And so there's really no need to be comparing to the newer PrEP, which costs a lot more when it does exactly the same job as the old version. And that brings me on to new long-acting PrEP, which is revolutionary. So Cabotegravir, that's the name of the drug, or sometimes it's written as Cabla. So that was actually approved by the FDA back in December 2021, so around about a year ago now. And this was brought to the market by Viv Healthcare, a pharmaceutical company who obviously own the intellectual property to this drug. And there's been a lot of evidence for Cabotegravir's efficacy as well. It works, essentially. It works better than the oral forms of oral PrEP that we've seen in recent clinical trials. So there's the HPTN-083 trial and the HPTN-084 trial. And we looked at both of these trials. We put them together like we did for the efficacy for oral PrEP. So combined, there are about 5,000 patients across both these trials. And there were just under 100 people who got HIV in the oral PrEP group. And there were just under 20 who got HIV in the Cabotegravir group. So that's a relative risk of 5 times or 500%, which is monumental. The difference between these two is stark. And there are lots of reasons for that. We know that having to take a pill every day is not a fantastic method of drug taking for adherence. So having to have an injection, so that's how the Cabotegravir is done. It's an injection once every 2 months, so 6 times a year, as opposed to taking the pill that you need to take every day. This obviously alleviates some stigma as well around pill taking, having to carry it with you, explain to people why you're taking it, etc. And obviously not having to take it every day and just being able to go to the doctors or the clinic once every 2 months ultimately will improve adherence. And so you see lower infection rates with the new long-acting Cabotegravir, which is fantastic news. The not so good news, and as is often the case when it comes to lots of drugs that come to the market, is the price. So at the moment, at the time of recording this, there are prices available on the market. So for the old version of PrEP, the guide price, the market price is around $350 per patient per year in the US. And in the UK, it's about $170 per patient per year. The Pan American Healthcare Organization actually has a list price of about $55 per patient per year. So the Pan American Health Organization is an organization that is part of the World Health Organization, and they help establish equitable healthcare and access to healthcare throughout South America. And so their list price is around $55 per patient per year, which is fantastic. That means that oral PrEP is affordable for lots of people in low and middle income countries across South America. And prices are generally quite low now for oral PrEP, the older version at least, as generics are available throughout most of the world. The issue comes with the drugs such as the newer form of oral PrEP and the new long-acting form of PrEP, Cabotegravir. Their prices are astronomical because their intellectual property is owned by pharmaceutical companies that bring them to market. So at the moment, the newer form of oral PrEP, tenofovir, alafeminide, TAF, that's around $17,000 or just under per patient per year in the US. And it's around $5,000 per patient per year in the UK. And for Cabotegravir, the new long-acting form, currently $22,200 per patient per year in the US, and $9,000, just over $9,000 per patient per year in the UK. Obviously, these prices are astronomical for patients or healthcare systems alike. And so it sort of begs the question, how much do we think these drugs would cost to make? So the Clinton Health Access Initiative, they actually recently published some work looking at how much they estimate it would cost to make Cabotegravir, the new long-acting form of PrEP. So they actually factored in how much it would cost to produce, packaging, a little bit of profit, having to pay taxes, and even recoupment of research expenses. And they estimate a price of around $96 per patient per year, compared to the $22,000 per patient per year that currently is being asked for in the US. And so how do we enable or facilitate access to low and middle income countries, the places that are really now affected by HIV, places where incidence is rising over the globe, like we said, South America, the Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia and Eastern Europe? How do we enable or ensure access for these countries when the prices are so astronomical? Well, following a lot of civil society pressure and talks with the medicines patent pool, Viv initially wouldn't agree, but did eventually agree to a voluntary license 8 months after FDA approval. So this license allows 90 countries across the globe to procure Cabotegravir for generic prices. To my knowledge, no generics have actually been acquired by any countries across the globe as of December or the end of November. But in principle, the deal stands. So the deal, and this is a quote from Viv Healthcare. So they said it will allow low and lower middle income countries, as well as all African countries, regardless of income, to access affordable generic versions of the drug. And they were delighted because they were enabling access to new HIV prevention in countries most affected by HIV. And this was the part that we really got us thinking most. Is this really true? Is this deal going to help the countries most affected now? And so the first part of what we did, so our methods, was to assess the suitability of this deal struck between the medicines patent pool and Viv Healthcare. So we collected data from UNAIDS and the World Bank, and we compared the population and incidence data with the list of countries that were excluded and some countries that were excluded. And from this table, you can see that there really is no rhyme or reason to which countries were included or excluded. Seychelles is the richest African country by GDP per capita, and there are plenty of countries with huge populations of people, really big populations of people with HIV and large incidences every year that were excluded from the deal. So places like China, Russia, Malaysia, Argentina, etc. The list goes on. So what we want to do is introduce a real threshold, an actual number for countries to be excluded or included. So the first threshold we introduced was that of Mauritius, so a GDP per capita of Mauritius, which is just under $9,000 US. And introducing this as a threshold actually includes 24 previously excluded low and middle income countries, and takes the total people covered by the deal up to 5.1 billion people, which is 64% of the world population. Originally, the deal covered about 4.2 billion. And then we introduced a second threshold, so we moved that bar even higher. So we secondly looked at the GDP per capita of Seychelles, which is the richest African country by GDP per capita. Their GDP per capita being just over $13,000 US. And using this threshold, we included 38 previously excluded low and middle income countries. And this moves the bar for people included in the deal worldwide to 6.6 billion people, which is 83% of the world's population. Moving these bars includes countries like China and Argentina, Thailand, countries where there are huge populations, as well as Brazil, which is a country with huge population, a big HIV incidence every year, and a place where clinical trials for this particular drug were conducted. The second part of what we wanted to do was look at the sales figures from ViiV for Cabotegravir so far after their release at the start of the year, its release rather. And we wanted to use the incidence data from those previous trials that I mentioned to really figure out and pin down the numbers and see how cost effective Cabotegravir is at the moment. So from this slide, you can see we've calculated the risk reduction across both trials that compare Cabotegravir to the old form of oral PrEP, and there's a risk reduction of about 1.6%, which gave us that number needed to treat of about 63. So we had a look, and so far in the US, and they've only sold in the US, ViiV have sold about $24 million worth of Cabotegravir. So if you divide this number by the amount that one course per patient per year currently costs, that's 22,000, you end up with just over 1,000 patient years. So using this reduction of about 1.6%, the risk reduction, and the 1,059 patient years, this means that the incidence would be equal to about 16 new infections prevented annually if we were to use Cabotegravir at this market price. So for $24 million worth of Cabotegravir sales, we've prevented only 16 new infections. Furthermore, this 16 new infections, if you put that into the $24 million worth of Cabotegravir sales, one infection to prevent one infection costs $1.5 million per year. This is a number that we believe is simply not sustainable, a number that is completely untenable for low and middle income countries all over the world. And we really think that we're missing a big chance here to try and get Cabotegravir out to as much of the world as we can, to try and reduce that incidence and really slow and halt the epidemic rather. So what cost price do we think it would need to be at? What is cost effective for Cabotegravir to work as well as oral PrEP does for it to make a difference? Well, a recent cost effectiveness and threshold analysis was done. So this was released in the Lancet in November, and there's a relative cost they looked at. So how cost effective it would need to be Cabotegravir for it to be as effective as oral PrEP. So they'd estimated a cost of between $9 and $15 per injection, which would mean a price somewhere between $60 to $119 per patient per year for Cabotegravir to be as effective as oral PrEP. At the moment, obviously, as we said earlier, prices are nowhere near this, and so it's really important that we press to try and allow generic access globally for Cabotegravir. So just to conclude, in the years since launch, another 1.5 million people have been infected, and Cabotegravir is hardly being used across the globe. And so there are millions of people across the world without access to the most effective form of prevention. Cabotegravir, as we said, could be manufactured for around $96 per patient per year. There is the potential to prevent hundreds of thousands of new infections by expanding this voluntary licensing deal with ViiV to all countries with a GDP per capita within African levels. And the deal currently excludes 2.4 billion people in middle-income countries outside of Africa, where the epidemic is rising. Thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for listening. It's obviously a really important topic.